and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with Rashmi. Thank you for joining me. Today, joining me in conversation is Joan Grundy, an educator for 30 years, 28 of those with the Catholic District School Board. And Joan has assumed many roles during her tenure as an educator, and from religion and faith formation consultant to guidance counselor, vice principal, as well as acting principal. And Joan is also a guest speaker in areas of spirituality. She's been doing a lot of work to support the LGBTQ plus youth, and also a recipient of the Chairs Award, which is the most prestigious and highest award given by the Waterloo Catholic District School Board for contribution to the school board and community at large. Joan is also an author, as well as a community influencer, and the book that she's written is called A Deepening Life. So thank you so much. It's an honor and pleasure to have you be a part of this conversation today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Rashmi.
For more than 20 years and came out as gay while you were at the time with the Catholic District School Board as vice principal. So what was that like, living a double life, and why did you choose to do that?
Okay, it's interesting you use the term double life. I never really thought of it as that because I was out to quite a few colleagues who were very, very supportive of me. One in particular, my friend Joanne, who accompanied me as I was coming to understand who I was as a gay woman. I was 33 years of age before I named that for myself, and I was already at that point head of a religion and family life department out in a high school in Cambridge. So I write about that in chapter 2 of my book, actually, called The Path of Integrity. It's very difficult to, come to that place where now what do I do? Because I had moved into a relationship with a woman, and the official church teaching is it's okay to be gay, but not to express that in any relational form. So that was very difficult. So for me, it didn't feel so much like a double life, but it certainly was soul-defying in not being able to be authentically who I was and be able to go into the staff room with everyone and say, oh, so-and-so and I did this on the weekend. Even with my family at first, who I did not come out to, sort of creating little mini fibs, as I like to call them. I guess that's a nicer way of saying a lie about what I had done, because I wasn't at that place to be able to share that with even my family at that point. It took me a little while. The people within the board were wonderfully supportive of me when I did come out, but I felt I needed to, I'd represented LGBTQ kids for a number of decades in the board. I represented a number of things in the board, but it was time, I felt, to represent myself finally. And that's why I wrote chapter 2 in my book. It happened to come out into print 4 days before I retired. I think some people thought I planned it that way. I really didn't. Liz Montero, who I deeply respect from the record, had asked me when it is ready, would I do an interview? And I let her know it's ready, and it happened to be the week I was retiring. So it did come out. Must have been a slow news day, because it ended up being on the front of the paper that day. So a lot of people got exposure to it. I called my mom and said, you better tell your bridge club, Mom. It's going to be out there. And she said, oh, I already have months ago, 91-year-old mom, she's quite something. And I have a transgender cousin who she's very specific about using the proper pronouns. And so people can evolve and change. I think that's a sign of hope. Back to your original question about a double life. I would be dishonest to say that it was not difficult at times. I ended up actually developing asthma. That got quite severe at times. I have no doubt that was tied in with feeling like my breath was being taken from me and who I was. Living in a different Catholic board about 20 years ago for being a gay man, deeply respected in his board, but lost his job. And I know when I came out to my parents, they both said, we love you, it doesn't change how we feel about you. My dad was a Catholic trustee in Brantford for over 30 years. And then he said to me, just be careful with your job. And I would say that was their number one worry, was not so much who I was, stepping into my truth. It was what the world, what my job could possibly do to me. Mm-hmm. So I lived in fear for a number of years, and I'm not saying that that was fun at all, because it wasn't. And that's one of the reasons I said yes to your interview, because in some ways I'm on the outside looking in now, and I know there's a lot of LGBTQ staff and certainly vulnerable kids that need positive advocates. Mm-hmm. And I really feel it's important, if you have something to offer, to speak up and offer it.
And at any point when you felt fear, did you feel that you would never be accepted in the community, or where you're the place of work, or even, you already mentioned that your family was very acceptable of who you mm-hmm. were, but were you fearing that being accepted in the community was one of the reasons for the fear?
Well, I've had friends that have come out to their families, very loving families, and not been accepted. So I still feared that, even though in my heart I thought I was pretty safe to do so. Mm-hmm. I remember driving there that night thinking, I'm risking losing the love of the two people whose love matters most to me in the whole world. That was scary. Maybe I should have given them more credit, but I just seen friends of mine who felt that they would be safe too, and they weren't. And one to this day, the father still does not accept her partner, her wife now. Mm-hmm. So, there was a lot of fear around that. And in terms of the school board, I wasn't so much scared about being rejected, because, as a retired administrator, you can't always win battles with everyone in life, or whether it has to do with this issue or another issue. Mm-hmm. You're never going to have everyone on your side. So I wasn't naive to think there wouldn't be some people who would turn their backs on me. But really at that point, again, in my 30s, my whole approach to that thinking was, well, then they're not really truly friends or supportive colleagues in the first place. So I wasn't as worried about that, because it wasn't the colleagues I was worried about. It was the official teaching of the church, which Catholic boards are mandated to follow. And knowing what that teaching was, and knowing even these good people would be put between a rock and a hard place, even if they wanted to support me, mm-hmm. some of them would not have been able to, and would have been risking their jobs to do so. So, it was pretty layered. But for the most part, I felt very supported and very cared for by my supervisors, by my colleagues, by the people I led, So, yeah, that's wasn't so much worried about my colleagues as it was about the external pressure that could be excised onto the school board in dealing with me.
So being a vice principal for a Catholic school system and dealing with students day in and day out, you knew that some of them needed help, especially being an LGBTQ+, and you shared, those challenges and issues that they were talking about to you. So how was that, and what are the issues that we're talking about here that the students are dealing with?
Right. Yeah, it was interesting. I actually, alongside BJ York, who's a teacher at St. David's, wonderful man, identifies as a straight man. He was a great companion on the journey for me. He sensed my struggles and challenges, and he just came into my vice principal office one day and said, what can I do to help? And so he and I began PRISM, which is a gay straight alliance, basically. And we worked together to work with students, do a lot of educating, of having panels, having gay persons, some students, some professors, some parents of gay kids. We also had a panel for transgender mm-hmm. students. My cousin JP, who's transgender, was on that. He's 65 now. He has quite the journey that he was able to share. So I was dealing through PRISM directly with young people, and I keep using the word haunt when I talk about this, but it haunted me that what message am I giving them? Because many of them picked up that I was probably a gay woman, not to stereotype, but I'm kind of a little bit of a short-haired sporty girl. And so, and gaydar does in fact exist. So I knew that they were reading that for me, and it really bothered me that I was there trying to support them, encourage them to live as they were, and to celebrate that. And here I was living closeted in my role. So these young people, they don't tend to let you go, and I'm glad they don't. I'm actually good friends with many of them today who are now older adults, married and having their own little babies and their own families. And I asked them, I said, how did it make you feel knowing I was a gay woman and I wasn't out? And it really put my heart to rest, because they all without exception said to me, Miss Grundy, we knew the position that you were in. We were just really grateful that you were advocating for us, that you were there for us. In fact, when my book came out, and again, front page of the paper, Gay Catholic VP comes out, I had one of my students from BC email me and say, Miss Grundy, you walked with me when I came out. I just want you to know I've got your back as you're coming out right now. It was really sweet to get that email. So a number of these kids are really, really hurting. Numbers of things we dealt with, people cutting freak into their stomach, drinking bleach. I can honestly tell you that there wasn't a single student that I dealt with closely one-on-one that didn't go through some form of depression or struggle while they were coming to terms with who they were. And I often say, I'm glad I was 33 when I figured out I cannot imagine what it would be like to be 11, 12 or younger, 15, 16-year-old dealing with coming out. I mean, I had the emotional, psychological, and financial resources to take care of myself at age 33. These kids are so vulnerable. And if they don't have their family, and many of them, unfortunately, have heard that God doesn't accept them, that God's against same-sex orientation, transgender persons. Wow, that's a double whammy. No family support, no God, no faith, God support. It doesn't surprise me that there's suicidal ideation, and in fact, suicide rates are 3 to 4 times higher than they are for heterosexual youth. And as far as I'm concerned, I said in my article, Edmund Burke said, all it takes for evil to persist is for good people to do nothing. I've had that little quote on my classroom door since I was 24 years of age and starting out, and I had it to my final day as a VP. I don't think there's a greater quote than that for this call in this area right now. And I know it's not easy. I know you're caught between rocks and hard places with the official church, but we are a pilgrim church, and the change often happens from the bottom up, not the top down. I see a lot of hope in Pope Francis, but he's also his feet are held to the fire by the magisterium and by the larger teaching body of the church that surrounds him. So it's a tough one, and I really appreciate how difficult it is for staff that still work within. And I still do some retreats and workshops and some supply days in the Waterloo Catholic Board. I'm hoping I'm able to still continue to do that after being quite vocal about this issue. But I really tried to be respectful, because I know deep down in my bones what they're up against. And I do appreciate the position that they're put in. These are good people. The director, I know her personally, Loretta, and the trustees, I know many of them. They're wonderful, wonderful people who care deeply about all kids, including LGBTQ kids and staff. But they're walking that tightrope that I walked for many years too. So I empathize with them.
Do you think the school system kind of lacks the learning and the courses offered to teachers when it comes to inclusivity?
Not at all. In fact, as I can only speak for my own school, St. Mary's, anytime we were going to have a panel to support the education of students around LGBTQ issues, I always insisted that we did the work with staff first. That was an important step. And I think that sometimes gets jumped over. People want to move things along fast. And trust me, I did too, but I know it doesn't work that way. You've got to bring people along. Even those on the continuum that are still very, very ignorant in the true sense of the word about these issues, and it's not something people choose. It kind of boggles my mind that anyone still believes that, I just moved into my home here in Brantford 2 years ago, and I have a neighbor who's I would say does have some mental illness issues, and so that allows me to have empathy, but quite homophobic and quite vocally homophobic with me, dyke, and lots of very, very vile kinds of things she has said to me. And a lot of it is out of ignorance. We have to have room for those people too, and to listen to them and try to help them understand that it's not choices. I wouldn't choose to be a person who some of the world still dislikes strongly and even hates. It's a lot easier to not be LGBTQ in the world. So I don't know why anyone would choose the oppression, but some people still believe it's a choice. It's not.
And you've been in the...
Sorry to interrupt. The only choice is whether to be authentically who you are or to live as you feel other peoples would have you live. And I remember a gay man on TV saying, I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not. That was a very significant quote for me in my 30s when I was deciding whether I'm going to tell anyone or am I just going to, suck it up, buttercup, and, continue to literally suffocate myself and get deeper and deeper into the asthma and emotional issues and everything else. So, again, I have a deep appreciation for where people find themselves on that continuum of understanding. When I do workshops, I take people where they're at. I was very homophobic as a young teenager because I'm sure I was that internalized homophobia. I was scared of coming to terms with who I was. Went through a very deep depression when I was 22 for 9 months, very deep depression. It wouldn't be for the love of my parents and my spirituality that taught me that, no one takes a life except the person who's created you, and how devastating it would be for my parents. I could easily be one of those statistics that would have been lost, and probably people wouldn't have even known one. So I came out at the time.
And you've been in the system, and how do again, because you've been in the Catholic board system, so there must be other staff who are LGBTQ plus as well. How do they deal with who they are in the current system that we have right now?
I think it continues to be very difficult for them. I used to joke and say I'm like gay Catholic teacher central, because I would get emails and phone calls from teachers in the board that I'd never even met but had heard about me and the work I was doing, and say, can we buy you a coffee, say a couple, or somebody just saying, how do you do it? I'm really struggling. And it saddened me at times, because if they were a young teacher, I would say to them, I have 10, 15 years ahead of me. You have your whole career ahead of you. I really would encourage you to think about this in terms of, because they were asking me, should I apply to the public board only, or should I apply to the Catholic board? These were deeply faith-filled people, and it broke my heart sometimes to say to them, you're wanting to be married as a couple, you're wanting to have a family, and right now you really need to think about that. And again, not because of the people in the board who were good, supportive people who would celebrate them, but because of the mandate of the church that directs the board's rules and regulations.
And with the current decision being made of not flying any flag with the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, is there now a division that's been created because of this decision? What do you think from the conversations you've had?
I would say that most of the conversations I've had have only been in response to the article I wrote, and many people saying to me, I'm glad you said what you did. I think many of the people I've spoken to appreciate that tension that the director and the trustees live in with the church. I'm not that well connected anymore. I live in Brantford. I'm not technically in the board per se as an employee anymore, full time. So I don't want to say that I can speak for everyone, but I guess I can share my hope. I know that Loretta Naughton, the director, and most of those trustees thought they were doing a good thing, thought this was a small step in the right direction to at least put some flag up, not realizing that a symbol really is a strong symbol for the LGBT community, that pride flag, and nothing can or should replace it. So I really believe in my heart of hearts, there was no malice. Having studied a master's in theological studies, we talk about intentionality when we talk about moral ethics. What was the intent of the action?
Mm-hmm.
As sure as I'm sitting here, I can tell you their intent was very well intentioned. So causing divisions, I hope not. I hope that people can see it the way that I really believe it was. I can't control the people that say, well, there they go again, these darn Catholics, they hate gay people. That's just not true. And I don't know all the statements made by a couple of the trustees that were quite adverse to flying of the pride flag. But some of the comments I hear from some people who purport to be Catholic are not even consistent with Catholic teaching. The Catechism of the Catholic Church speaks clearly to supporting and respecting the dignity and celebrating the dignity of all persons. And some of the things that come out of some of the mouths of some people aren't even contemporary Catholic thought. And that people need to be reminded of that as well, especially people outside of the Catholic community that say, oh my gosh, that church is so archaic. Do I wish it would speed up on this issue as well as the women in the priesthood issue? And there's a number of issues that I believe it needs to move forward with. But the only change that happens, particularly with institutions, because they move slowly, is done, I think, sensitively. I don't know whether I think it was Sharon Stone or some actress that said to be thoughtful in provoking thought. And I thought a lot about that quote when I was writing that article.
Mm-hmm.
For me, throwing darts at people, causing, like you say, divisions, it's just not helpful. It feeds egos of people. I see, I'm right, I could be righteous. But I think a dose of humility goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. And this advocacy, or the fight to have that equality in the community and be accepted, has been a long fight for a long time over the years.
Pretty great.
Over and over, yeah. And do you think we need people to start listening, to learn, to pay attention of the bigger picture, as with what's happening with lives, how it's affecting people who are in that situation, and what their actions are doing to young youth today? So is that something that lacks in all of these scenarios here?
Well, one of my major frustrations was, and again, it was well-intentioned by a priest who was the chaplain at the time, not the present priest who is, and he was a good man. I mean, he's still alive. He is a good man. He's retired now. And he wrote an article called The Challenges of Homosexuality. And I remember thinking, not a single gay person was consulted on that document that went out to every single board member on how to approach dealing and supporting LGBTQ. At that point was only targeted toward youth. I was tearful. I was so upset. And it upset me to be around tables where I had to speak. Well, I would think a gay person would have problems with this, and it was so liberating at the end of my career to be able to speak openly as I am gay, and I'm telling you, this is harmful. This is not what's going to be helpful. This is what LGBTQ people have wanted. So yes, I agree. There are not enough voices of people within the community itself that are being invited to the table. So I was very thrilled and very hope-filled when Loretta said that the intent is to consult with Tri-Pride, with perhaps, KW Counseling, Okay to Be Me, people like myself, people who identify within this community. That would have been helpful, and that probably would have saved them a lot of headaches with that alternate flag that they were proposing to fly, because I don't know too many LGBTQ people who would have said, no, please don't do that. Wait till you're ready to fly the pride flag, or don't fly any flag at all. I could be wrong, because I did remember hearing somebody on the news who identified saying, well, I thought at least it was an important first step. So people may feel differently, but I feel very strongly that you get to the place where you're ready to raise that pride flag, or you don't put an alternate up. No. So yeah, you're right on the mark. There needs to be more voices invited forward in our churches, in our Catholic school systems, in our world in general. And I would say the same for, we see what's happening over in the States right now. You know, it's problematic when you don't invite people in to.
And we don't want to get to that point where it's reached a point of no return and lives are lost. And that's when those voices come out, right? Like, it's been a battle for a long time. And it's time now that people listen and put this into effect.
Absolutely. You know, when I came out and that article happened around the printing of my book, there was 2 phone calls that came in the next morning. I was braced for reaction from the public. I still was going to St. Mary's Catholic High School, into my office. The secretary said, Joan, there's a parent on the phone that wants to talk to you about the article. And I thought, okay, here we go. You know, I think it was Katie Lang that said, don't do anything that you can't live with the consequences of. And that's a very wise statement. And I knew that in doing that article and knowing that, okay. And, you know, the 2 calls I received were both from mothers of gay sons. And they were both in support of what I was doing. The one woman was crying. She had me crying. She said, I may still have my son if you would have been his VP at his high school. It was so humbling. Mm-hmm. But I'm not being dramatic when I say that kids' lives are lost all of the time. Not just in Catholic schools, public schools too. They still have their battles with some religious groups. But these kids, they are so vulnerable. They need someone in their court. In fact, the statistics say that 40 to 50% of these suicides and self-harm behaviors can be totally eradicated if they have someone supporting them in their schools directly, and particularly people who can self-identify as being part of that same community. And that's why it's so important that Catholic schools move to that place where I could have come out safely, you know, way earlier than 4 days before I was retiring.
For sure. And just to give a perspective or an understanding as well, if you could share some of what the students, what is the basic thing that they need? Is be listened to and communicated, but what are the kind of conversations you've had with them?
Right. A lot of them, you know, my background, my master's is in Theological Studies with a concentration in counseling. And I remembered a very important concept is that oftentimes the presenting issue is not the core issue. And that often happens with these kids. They're maybe moving into addictive patterns. They're oftentimes, you know, not attending school anymore, being very, very adversarial at home. And it's only through those issues. And that's where that little pride flag, I had a tiny, honestly, the sticker couldn't have been this big on my desk when I was a guidance counselor. Those kids would notice that, and that just freed them up to be who they were. And also as a counselor, I'd say, okay, you're really struggling. You know, are you struggling because you're being bullied at school? Are you struggling because of home issues? Are you struggling because, you know, you may wonder if you are gay or transgender? And I just threw that in calmly in the mix. And that's what when I do workshops with guidance counselors, I said, please put that on your list. Because as soon as you do that, kids are going to know, okay, this is a person that's not going to melt if I actually say the word gay in front of them. And if they have that little safe space sticker in their office, that is a safe place I can talk about this. So they need to be heard. A lot of times there may be a parent, one or the other, sometimes both, that they're terrified of coming out to. And unfortunately, some of them have been asked to leave home. I remember one young woman in the winter, they didn't even allow her to put, you know, socks and boots on, just sent her out into the snowbank. So lots of sad stories. Remember a young person I worked with very, very closely who identified as transgender, and I just naturally made the crossover to calling her by the pronoun she, but every time I would talk to the home, I'd have to say, okay, remember, say he, because if I didn't, it would really trigger the family. And then you have on their report card, their official name is one gender, but how they identify is the other. A supply teacher comes in, like their regular teacher may have already moved to the new name they preferred. Now you have a supply teacher coming in, no offense to them, they're just reading down the class list to take attendance. And now you have that name that does not reflect who that person is being read out, and the embarrassment, the discomfort in front of their peers. So, there's things that even as a gay person, I don't even think about for transgender people. And I'm very thankful to my cousin and to the many students I work with who bravely took me on their journey. And some of them still, I'm with them on their journey as they're actually transitioning bodily and having some surgeries to, gender affirmation surgery. So they're dealing with a lot. And I mean, this is on top of all the regular stresses that young people have to navigate, and for them, they have this on top of it, and it often sucks up most of their energy.
And focusing on academics on top of all of this is a huge challenge right there.
Absolutely.
So you're an author of the book, A Deepening Life. So tell me a little about that. How did that journey of writing a book begin?
Okay. My father battled Alzheimer's for 10 years. And the Alzheimer's Society of Brand had asked our family if we would be part of the campaign. And as part of that, I was asked to give a little talk at the campaign kickoff. And so I read what I'd written, and then Dave Levac, who was the MP at the time, he came and put his arm around my shoulder and said, "You got the beginnings of a good book there." And I always loved writing as a young person, and I've always wanted to write a book, but I just never knew how to get it started. So it was nice to get that idea that I could begin with that story. And so this is what it looks like, A Deepening Life. And it basically follows 5 themes that I think are fairly universal. They're about my journey, but the response from people who've read it is that they've been able to enter into those stories themselves. And it's about growing in consciousness. It's about reflecting on the lessons we've learned in life, or the lessons that are to be learned, whether we want to learn them is our choice, and how great wisdom can come from struggle. First chapter is about my father. It's called Unexpected Gifts, and it's about what he taught me through that journey. So it's sad, but it's also very hope-filled, because there was a lot of learning that I was able to do through that journey. And then the second chapter is the biggest chapter. It's called The Path of Integrity. And that's one that a lot of LGBTQ students and staff have been interested in reading, because it talks about myself coming to understand myself as a gay young woman, and working within the Catholic system and trying to support LGBTQ youth, and some stories about what that was like for me. And then there's a third chapter, Guided by Grace, about my own spiritual journey. The fourth is about relationships. And then the fifth is basically about spiritual growth, who will drive my soul. So I feel very good about it. I didn't really write it to really put it into print. I just wrote it because I'd always wanted to write something. But then I thought, well, I'll put all this 5 years of effort into it. So I was still working at the time, so I really only had weekends and summers to work on it. And I'm actually starting to draft one now called What Teens Taught This Teacher, that I'm excited about writing a second book, yes.
And where can people find this copy if they want to buy one?
Online at volumesdirect, all one word.com, or at Amazon, or at Indigo Chapters. All 3 of those places sell the book.
Great. Thank you so much, Joan. It was a pleasure talking to you. And again, June is Pride Month. So is there a message you would like to share in general to the public and to the community at large?
Absolutely. I want to first and foremost wish happy Pride to all people that identify within the community as I do. I would like to extend my care and support to LGBTQ plus youth. I was not a young person as I discerned who I was, but I certainly remembered identifying as feeling different, and what that caused, the internal turmoil for me as I moved into young adulthood. So I want you to know that a lot of adults not only have your back, we have your hearts too. We care about you, we love you, and there are supports out there that you can reach out to, and there are people that do love you and care for you. And then those moments where you're feeling really, really alone, know that you can move through that dark time in your life, and there are a lot of people who care about you. Sometimes even strangers like me that care about you. And I also want to extend a thank you to all of our allies, people who do have our backs and our hearts and who are doing good work and are trying to make things better. We're not there yet in a lot of areas, but I like to feel very hopeful and feel a lot of gratitude for the last 20 years, and who to believe that I would have been able to come out, when I did. And we would have, support groups in all of the Catholic high schools in the Modern Catholic Board. That's lots to be celebrated. People calling for the elementary schools to have them as well, and hopefully that will come with time. But just happy Pride to everybody. It's a good month to be alive in particular, and we are getting there. We are getting there. But I've always said students need to thrive, not just survive. And so there's still work to be done. And I thank you for allowing me to be part of the solution.
Thank you so much, Joanne. You take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and happy Pride.
Thank you very much.